Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com, NBA insider here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Kevin, is there a compelling series left? I mean, are you intrigued? Are you interested? Is anything grabbing you between Boston, Washington, and San Antonio and Houston?
I'm certainly still intrigued by San Antonio, Houston. I mean, yeah, it does feel a little bit like they're just kind of playing for the right to be the sacrifice to the Warriors in the conference finals. But still, these are two teams with that. I think you can make a case are to the. I mean, they're certainly two of the top four teams in the NBA, and depending on what you think of Cleveland's ability to flip the switch, maybe even the biggest threats to the Warriors left in the postseason, and a really interesting tactical series, the two contrasting styles of play. So I'm enjoying that quite a bit, even though none of the games have been particularly close as yet.
Right. Yeah. And I agree. Like if there was just those two teams playing with the right to go to the Western Conference Finals, and you believed that one of them could advance, I think that's where the sticking point is. Do you believe that either San Antonio or Houston can advance past Golden State?
I have the any chance rule I like to apply, and in this case, I think that does fit the any chance rule. You never know what's going to happen in terms of health and things like that, but Golden State pretty clearly an overwhelming favorite against either of them.
They sure are. What's left in that series? Let's stay there with Kawhi Leonard and the Spurs. I thought Barkley made an interesting point last night on the TNT postgame broadcast, saying very unlike any Spurs team where they rely on one guy to score so much. If Leonard doesn't have a great scoring night, they struggle.
Absolutely, it's a change from the Greg Popovich norm. But one of the things we know about him is he's tended to adapt over time to the personnel he has, and to some extent the style of the league. And at this point, that means putting the ball in Kawhi Leonard's hands because he's having one of the most efficient postseason runs in NBA history so far. But then when he is quiet, isn't able to get off like he wasn't last night, then it becomes a lot more difficult for the Spurs to score.
We're talking with Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com, NBA insider here on the Sports Bash. And then, of course, James Harden, who's kind of had a coming-out year. He has certainly been very good in these playoffs as well, including the game last night. I mean, he was excellent last night. But do you think that the Rockets, when you look at them, have you shifted towards them at all in this series, or are the Spurs still? Because many people thought this was a Spurs Golden State Western Conference Final, no matter what. Do you feel that Houston can get out of this series based on the way Harden's playing?
Oh, absolutely. And I came into this series thinking it was, a close series where I gave San Antonio the edge, largely because of home court advantage. And the good news for the Spurs here, even though the Rockets have, kind of dominated them in their two wins in this series, is that when the two teams are tied 2-2 after 4 games, that really shifts the advantage to the team with home court because of the fact that there's only 2 opportunities for the road team to get that win that they need, and that's extremely difficult to do in Game 7. So what it sets up, and this is probably true of both of the two series, that are competitive right now, is that the Game 5 really becomes a crucially important game for the lower seeded team to steal, and then have a chance to finish the series off back home in Game 6.
Speaking of road teams, Washington headed back on the road. Can they steal a game in Boston, Kevin?
I mean, if they play anything like they did in Games 3 and 4, the home court advantage certainly won't be enough to make up for it. Particularly, the dominant runs that they put on the Celtics, the 22-0 run in Game 3, and then a 26-0 run in the third quarter last night. That was just a freight train rolling downhill that the Celtics had no ability to stop whatsoever. And really, the Wizards have generally controlled the series, have gotten out to big leads in both Games 1 and 2. Their bench does have a tendency to give those up, but you wonder if Markieff Morris hadn't gotten injured in Game 1, whether they might be leading this series 3-1 and thinking about closing it out.
You think Washington has enough depth, though, because they rely so much on their backcourt?
Yeah, and that'll be interesting as this series moves along. Their starters are logging a lot heavier minutes. Their starters have been dominant, and their bench has struggled so much that Scott Brooks has relied heavily on those 5 guys, and then maybe Kelly Oubre when he hasn't been suspended or ejected from the game, and he'll be back in Game 5. But the good news for them is 2 days off between Game 3 and 4, and now again between Games 4 and 5, because this was the first series to start. And if it does go 7, it would be the last one to finish. It's the only one that is extending past this Sunday.
Kevin Pelton with us talking NBA playoffs. And how about on the Boston side of things? You know, I talk about the backcourt and Washington relying on their backcourt. Celtics rely so much on Isaiah Thomas. Do they have enough, or do you think the Wizards get by here?
I still think the Celtics are the favorites because of home court, going back to what I said. And, you know, it's interesting. One thing I looked at is how much does it change when a team has, you know, controlled the series, the lower-seeded team, as much as the Wizards have, outscoring the Celtics so far by 24 points over the first 4 games. And weirdly, it turns out that those teams actually have teams that have outscored the higher seed by at least 20 points in the first 4 games. None of the 5 of them that have done it since '84 have won the series. So that's a weird little trend. But, yeah, the Celtics are going to need to get more help for Isaiah Thomas. The Wizards have done a nice job of, you know, denying him the basketball, kind of forcing the Celtics to play 4-on-4, and that makes it a little more difficult for them to help, but it forces other Boston players to create off the dribble, and on Sunday night they certainly weren't capable of doing that.
Kevin Pelton's with us. All right, so I guess we can kind of agree that, yeah, there's been some fun games, there's some interesting stories, but the playoffs, there's not been a lot of competitive games, and most of the teams we don't really buy can win the playoff round. So if the NBA gets what they want, which everybody's anticipating, Cleveland versus Golden State, potentially unbeaten, was it all worth it? Would the NBA be happy if they just get that matchup again, basically having a non-compelling playoff year? I mean, the whole playoffs has been very non-compelling.
I think so, because you still look at the ratings there, and they've generally been up on both the TNT and ESPN broadcasts over last season. People are still tuning in to watch LeBron and the Cavaliers and to see this Warriors team with all its star power, see how they figure things out. And you got to assume if they do square off in the NBA Finals, it could mean huge ratings for that series.
Kevin, we asked this question early in the show, and hey, for years, LeBron was the villain, right? He was the villain, and he didn't score enough. He passed too much. It wasn't his team. But have these playoffs reversed the roles of LeBron and Durant? I mean, it seems that LeBron is now the greatest player. There's not a lot of debate there. People are starting to kind of soften on all the criticism towards him, and yet I feel like Golden State has turned into the villains here. So have these playoffs reversed those two guys' roles?
Yeah, I think, going back to Durant leaving Oklahoma City, I mean, that's really where this all started. When LeBron was in Cleveland during his first run, he was very much the white hat, and it was only when he went to Miami and left Cleveland that he became the villain. And then that was sort of contrasted with, at the same time, Durant was coming into his own as a star and signed the extension quietly to stay in Oklahoma City, which, got contrasted with the decision. And that's what made him out to be the, good guy superstar, the KD is not nice campaign, you'll recall, and all that. But now with him leaving Oklahoma City, doing something similar to go to Golden State, and then embracing, I think, the jeers of road fans, getting into it with those fans in Utah, and even the mascot Bear at the end of that game, he's certainly embracing it, and I think that's probably going to stay that case.
Get the F off the court. That's what Durant told him.
Yep.
Kevin Pelton with us. Many, Kevin, were critical of Durant, and then watching these playoffs, was that bad for the game, knowing what we know now, how this is all played out?
I mean, I think it would have been a more competitive Western Conference playoffs if you had Durant in Oklahoma City, just because of the fact that would have been another team that could have contended with Golden State and gave them their toughest test a year ago. But the Warriors were already pretty good without him. That's been one of kind of the interesting things this year is how dominant they've been even when he's injured. They still had far and away the league's best point differential in that stretch. He missed with a sprained MCL and then won a couple playoff games without him against the Blazers in the first round.
All right, they continue tonight, Golden State and the Jazz. We'll see if the Jazz can maybe steal one there. And, of course, Boston, that game is later on in the week, and they take on the Wizards, trying to close that one out. And Houston and San Antonio, they'll try to finish their series. But that one could be a 7-gamer, and that one's a lot of fun. But we'll see if either team can push the Warriors and the Cavaliers. Kevin Pelton over at ESPN.com has more on the NBA playoffs, and hopefully we get some entertaining series. A lot of blowout games in a lot of these.
Make me want to watch. Come on, NBA. Let's deliver it.
We'll do our best. Kevin, thanks so much, pal.
All right, thanks for having me.